I check every lock twice before I sleep. Front door, back door, garage, side door. My wife stopped asking why 3 years ago. She can tell by my face when a question doesn't have an answer she wants to carry around. I also never park near storm drains. I take the long way around parking structures that have ground-level vents. I do not walk close to chain-link fencing at night. Any chain link, anywhere. It doesn't matter where I am. My brother-in-law thinks I have OCD. My doctor suggested anxiety medication twice. I smiled and said I'd think about it. I spent 11 years doing private security work, warehouses, construction sites, a hospital once, a decommissioned military depot outside Great Falls. You develop a relationship with empty buildings in that work, a feel for the specific quality of silence that belongs to a place where nothing living remains. The Rimrock Animal Park outside Billings, Montana, did not feel empty. It felt like something in it had decided to stay. I worked that property for 31 nights before I understood what the previous guard had meant when he transferred out and left me a single handwritten note taped to the inside of the guard booth door. 6 words, no explanation. Do not go near Enclosure 7. I wish I had listened. I wish I understood then what I understand now, that some instructions exist not because the person writing them wants to protect you, but because they cannot bring themselves to describe what happens if you don't follow them. The Rimrock Animal Park had operated for 22 years before the county pulled its operating license in the winter of 2019. Budget collapse, staff reduction, 3 consecutive failed inspections, the kind of institutional decline that happens slowly and then all at once, like a building that looks fine until the day it doesn't. The animals had been redistributed to accredited facilities across 5 states. That was the official account, published in the Billings Gazette on a Tuesday in November, below the fold. Most people didn't read past the first paragraph. By the following spring, the county had contracted private security to maintain the property through the sale process. 41 acres in the Rimrock country south of the city, where the land breaks into dramatic sandstone formations and the wind comes off the Beartooth foothills with a particular cold authority that reminds you exactly where you are and how far you are from anything. I took the assignment in September. My supervisor described it as easy work. Single guard rotation, 12-hour overnight shifts, 5 nights a week. Walk the perimeter road twice per shift in the company pickup. Check the service buildings, radio check-in at midnight and 4 a.m. The property had a functioning alarm system on the visitor center and main service building. The enclosure areas were gated and padlocked, fencing intact, no reported breach of perimeter. Empty property, routine assignment. The Rimrock sat on a slight rise above the surrounding terrain, which meant on clear nights you could see the lights of Billings to the north, like a distant civilization that had nothing to do with where you were standing. The Rimrock formations on the south and east boundaries gave the property a natural wall. Dramatic, pale stone rising 20, 30 feet in places, carved by 10,000 years of wind into shapes that looked almost intentional, almost like enclosures of their own. The smell of the place hit you before anything else. Not decay exactly. The years of weather had taken care of the worst of it. But something underneath the sage and pine and cold stone. A biological memory the land hadn't finished processing. 14 enclosures had held living animals for 2 decades. The ground remembered. I met the outgoing guard in the parking lot on my first evening. His name was Garrett Cole. He was 53, ex-Army, the kind of man who chose his words the way other men chose their tools, for a specific purpose, nothing extra. He had done this assignment for 6 weeks and was transferring to a warehouse contract in Missoula. He did not explain why he was transferring. He showed me the guard booth, the radio protocol, the vehicle log. He walked me through the perimeter route once, pointing out the service road intersections and the 2 gates that needed their padlocks lifted before the latch would turn. We were standing at the junction of the east and north service roads when he stopped walking. He looked at the east enclosure row. 7 structures in a line, numbered plaques visible on each gate in the beam of his flashlight. He stood there for a moment in a way that had nothing to do with routine handoff procedure. Then he took a notepad from his jacket pocket and wrote 6 words, tore the page out, handed it to me without looking at me. I read it, looked up. He was already walking back to his vehicle. That note stayed taped to the inside of the guard booth door for 31 nights. Do not go near Enclosure 7. The formal rules for the property were standard private security protocol. Nothing I hadn't followed 100 times on 100 other contracts. Sign in, sign out, radio checks, incident log, no unauthorized personnel, preserve and protect. But Garrett Cole's note was not the only informal guidance I found. On my third night, doing a thorough walkthrough of the guard booth, I found a yellow legal pad in the desk drawer beneath the vehicle log. 14 pages of handwriting. Garrett's. I recognized it from the vehicle log entries. The first page was dated 6 weeks prior, his first night on the property. The last entry was dated 2 days before my start date. It read like a shift log that had slowly become something else. I'll give you the entries that mattered. Week 1, Night 3. Heard something in the east enclosure row around 2 a.m. Assumed wind. No visual. Will monitor. Week 1, Night 5. Sound again. East row near 7. Not wind. Possibly animal. Stray dog. Coyote. Called it into dispatch. They said check the perimeter fencing for breach. Fencing intact. No entry point found. Week 2, Night 2. Do not use your flashlight directly into enclosure 7 after midnight. The beam draws it to the fence. I learned this the wrong way. Week 2, Night 4. If the temperature drops suddenly and there is no weather reason for it, you are too close. Back up. Do not turn around first. Back up while facing it. Week 3, Night 1. It does not respond to sound. I tried the vehicle horn at a distance. It did not move away. It moved closer. Do not make noise near enclosure 7. Week 3, Night 3. Stay in the vehicle after midnight. If you are on foot in the east row after midnight, you are in its space and it knows it, and you will know it too. Stay in the vehicle. Week 4, Night 2. It comes to the fence between 1 and 3 a.m. Not every night. I cannot find the pattern. The nights it does not come are worse because I am waiting for it. Week 4, Night 5. I found marks on the outside of the fence at enclosure 7 this morning. On the outside. It has been testing the perimeter. It is not trying to get out. I have thought about this. It is checking whether the outside is secure, whether something is getting in. Week 5, Night 3. Do not be outside when it vocalizes. The sound carries differently than it should for the distance. It will feel like it is directly behind you. It is not directly behind you. Probably. Week 5, Night 6. The placard on enclosure 7 says grizzly bear habitat. I have looked up every subspecies of grizzly bear. I have looked up every large predator in the state of Montana. I have looked up things that are not supposed to exist in Montana. I cannot find a category for what is in that enclosure. The last entry was a single line. Week 6, Night 7. I am not the right person for this job. I hope whoever reads this is. I read the entire pad on my 4th night. I sat in the guard booth with the overhead light on and read it twice. Then I looked at the note on the door, the 6 words. Then I made a list of what I now understood to be the actual rules of this property. Rule 1. Do not approach enclosure 7 on foot after midnight. Rule 2. Do not shine your flashlight directly into enclosure 7 after dark. Rule 3. If the air temperature drops suddenly without weather cause, you are too close. Back away facing forward. Rule 4. Do not make noise near enclosure 7. Sound draws it to the fence. Rule 5. Stay in the vehicle during the 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. window. Rule 6. If it vocalizes, do not assume the sound indicates its location. It carries wrong. Rule 7. Check the outside of the fence each morning. Note any new marks. If the marks change in character, call it in. I did not know what I would say when I called it in. I did not know what category this fell under on a standard incident report. I followed the rules for 26 nights. On the 31st night, I broke one. 2 weeks into my rotation, I drove into Billings on my day off and went to the county records office. I told the clerk I was doing a property research project. She was friendly and unhelpful in the way that government clerks are when they are trying to be helpful within constraints. They didn't design. I found what I needed in the operating license renewal files from 2017, 2 years before the park closed, specifically in the animal inventory discrepancy report filed by the State Wildlife Division. The park had operated with 4 grizzly bears in Enclosure 7 from 2009 onward, standard captive bear habitat, all 4 animals documented, numbered, photographed annually for the license renewal. The 2017 inspection noted 3 animals present. The 4th, a male designated R7 in park records, was listed as deceased Natural causes, undisclosed date. The inspection noted no carcass for examination, which the inspector flagged as a procedural gap, but did not escalate. The 2018 inspection noted 3 animals present. The 2019 inspection, the one that triggered the license pull, noted 2 animals present. No explanation in the filing for the discrepancy. The inspector's notes said simply, Enclosure 7 animal count inconsistent with records. Staff unable to account for discrepancy. Enclosure flagged for review. The review never happened. The license was pulled 2 weeks later for other reasons. When the redistribution happened, the remaining 2 bears went to a sanctuary in Colorado. Transfer documents confirmed. That left one question that the records did not answer. The 4th animal, R7, deceased, undisclosed date, no carcass examined. I drove back to the property that evening, thinking about an animal that had no confirmed death. An animal that the records had simply stopped accounting for. The way you stop accounting for something, when accounting for it becomes a problem you don't know how to solve. On my next shift, I asked the county liaison about R7 during our weekly check-in call. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, her voice had a different quality. Flatter, more administrative. She said the animal records from that period were incomplete due to staff turnover and the transition preceding the closure. She said all animals had been accounted for during the redistribution. She said if I had concerns about the property, I should document them through the standard incident report process. I thanked her and hung up. That night, I drove the East Service Road at 11 p.m. and stopped 50 yards from Enclosure 7 and cut my headlights and sat in the dark and listened. For a while, nothing. Then, from the enclosure, a sound. Low. Rhythmic. A breathing pattern too slow for a dog. Too resonant for anything I could put in a category. It carried the specific weight of something large that had learned to be quieter than its size suggested. I turned the headlights back on and drove to the guard booth. I wrote in the incident log, possible wildlife presence, East Enclosure Row. Monitoring. For the next 2 weeks, I followed Garrett's rules with the precision of someone who has read the consequences of not following them. I stayed in the vehicle after midnight. I kept my flashlight away from Enclosure 7. I drove the East Row at speed with my windows up and my eyes forward. And I checked the outside fence each morning in daylight. And I logged the marks when they appeared. Parallel gouges at varying heights on the exterior chain link, consistent spacing, consistent depth. And I filed incident reports that I knew would produce no action. The marks appeared on 14 of 17 mornings, never on the enclosure gate itself, always on the fence panels to either side of it, as if whatever was testing the perimeter was methodical enough to check the weak points rather than the obvious ones. I started to understand the shape of it, not what it was. That question stayed open, but how it thought. It was patient. It was systematic. It was not trying to escape. Garrett had been right about that. It was securing the perimeter, making sure nothing was getting in. The distinction between those two things is what I should have held on to. A colleague called me on a Thursday evening asking if I could cover his shift at a warehouse contract for a few hours while he dealt with a family situation. I said yes. It was straightforward, a 2-hour gap. I could drive out to the warehouse, do his check-in, and be back at Rimrock before midnight with no break in my own rotation. I left the property at 9 p.m. I was back at 11:45. I had been gone less than 3 hours. When I pulled through the main gate and started my vehicle check-in procedure, I saw that the East Service Road gate, which I had padlocked when I left, was standing open. Not broken open, not forced. Standing open, the padlock intact and hanging on the latch as if someone had simply unlocked it with a key. There was only one key. It was on my key ring, in my pocket. The entire time I was gone. I sat in the vehicle with the engine running and looked at that open gate, and then I heard it vocalize, closer than it had ever sounded from inside the vehicle. Close enough that the sound did not come from the direction of Enclosure 7 at all, but from the service road ahead of me, between me and the guard booth. Garrett's rule came back with precision. The sound carries differently than it should for the distance. It will feel like it is directly behind you, not in front of you, behind you. I locked my doors. I sat in that vehicle for 11 minutes by the clock on the dash before I moved. During those 11 minutes, nothing approached the vehicle. No movement in the headlights, no shadow at the fence line. The vocalization did not repeat. The silence that replaced it was the specific silence of something that has decided to wait rather than act. More deliberate than the absence of sound, carrying intention the way a held breath carries intention. At 11:58, I drove forward slowly, headlights on high, windows locked, and made my way to the guard booth without incident. I did my midnight radio check. Normal, no flag. At 1:15, I saw it for the first time in open ground. I was in the guard booth looking at the east enclosure row through the booth window, something I had done every shift, usually seeing nothing, when my peripheral vision registered movement on the service road between Enclosure 7 and Enclosure 8. Not at the fence, on the road, outside the enclosure. I did not move. I did not reach for my flashlight. I sat completely still the way Garrett's notes had taught me. Stillness as the correct response, not action, not noise. And I looked at what was on the service road. It was large, lower to the ground than I expected for something that had produced that vocalization. Not upright, not on all fours in any configuration I had reference for, but something between those two states that my brain kept trying to resolve into a known shape and kept failing. The front of it was heavier than the back. It moved with a fluid, forward-weighted motion that reminded me of something, and it took me a moment in the dark to identify what. It reminded me of a large cat, a mountain lion, but the scale was wrong. Too wide across the shoulders. The head carried forward and low, extended rather than lifted. It crossed the road in 4 seconds and disappeared between enclosures 8 and 9. I wrote in the log, movement observed on East Service Road, 011 hours, unable to identify, possible wildlife incursion. I filed the incident report in the morning. The county liaison called back 3 hours later. Her voice had that same flat, administrative quality. She said an inspection team would be scheduled. She said to continue normal patrol. She said to document any further incidents. 3 nights later, it came to the guard booth. I was doing paperwork at the desk, vehicle log, incident summaries, nothing requiring attention, when the light outside the booth window changed quality. Not dimmer, different. The way light changes when something large passes between the source and where you're sitting. I did not look up immediately. I finished the sentence I was writing. Then I looked. It was at the window, not pressed against it. Standing, and it was standing, upright, in a configuration that should not have been possible for the body type I had seen on the service road. Standing at a distance of perhaps 6 feet from the glass, in the ambient light of the booth's exterior lamp. I had been wrong about the scale. Not a large cat's dimensions. Larger. The shoulder width was enormous, carrying a mass that should have required more noise to move than it ever made. The coloring was a dark that was not quite brown and not quite black. Absorptive rather than reflective. The kind of darkness that takes light in rather than giving it back. The face. I will describe the face as accurately as I can, and I will tell you that accuracy does not make it easier. The face was not a bear's face, and it was not a cat's face, and it was not a face from any reference I had for large North American predators. It was considered. That is the word that kept arriving. The expression on that face was considered. The way a person looks when they are evaluating a situation with full information and have not yet decided on a course of action. It looked at me for what my watch later told me was 4 minutes. I did not move. I did not reach for the radio. I did not turn off the booth light. Rule 2 was about the flashlight, not the booth light, and I made that distinction in real time with the focused desperation of someone doing triage on available options. At the end of 4 minutes, it dropped back to the forward-weighted configuration I had seen on the service road, and it walked back toward Enclosure 7. At the gate that had been standing open 3 nights earlier, which I had since repadlocked, it stopped. It looked at the padlock. It looked back at me through the window. Then it stepped through the fence, not through the gate. Through the fence itself, through the chain link, which flexed and then returned to position, as if the animal had simply understood that the fence was a suggestion and had moved through it accordingly. The padlock was irrelevant. The padlock had always been irrelevant. I picked up the radio at 2 a.m. and called the county emergency line, not the liaison, the emergency line, and told them I had a confirmed large animal outside containment on the Rimrock property, and I needed immediate support. The dispatcher asked me to describe the animal. I described what I had seen. There was a pause. She asked me to repeat the description. I repeated it. Another pause. Longer. She said she would contact Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and have someone call me back. She said to stay in the guard booth. She said to keep the doors locked. I kept the doors locked. I stayed in the booth. I watched the east enclosure row through the window. At 2:47, the vocalization came again. This time, it was not ambiguous about distance. This time, it was at the guard booth door. on the other side of the door, close enough that the sound moved the air in the gap at the door's base. Then it went quiet. Then I heard breathing, slow and enormous, with the wet resonance I had heard on my second night when I thought it was wind through the habitat structures. It was not wind. It had never been wind. It was the breathing of something that had been on this property for longer than the property had existed in its current form. Something that had watched 12 years of operations and 2 years of abandonment and had simply continued, patient and permanent, outlasting every human decision made around it. The door handle moved, not violently, not with force, slowly. Deliberately, the handle rotated downward with the careful precision of something that understood the mechanism and was testing whether the lock was engaged. The lock was engaged. The handle returned to its original position. Silence for 30 seconds. Then I heard it at the window again. I did not look. I had made the decision not to look while I still had the capacity to make decisions. And I held that decision with both hands while the ambient light outside the window changed quality for the second time that night. My radio crackled. The dispatcher again. She said FWP was unavailable for immediate response. She said a warden would be on the property by first light. She said to stay locked in the booth. I asked her what she thought I was doing. The light outside the window normalized. The breathing stopped. First light was 2 hours and 14 minutes away. I did not sleep. The FWP warden arrived at 6:15. Her name was Superintendent Diana Marsh, and she was the kind of person who uses economy of expression as a professional tool. She said what she needed to say and nothing more, and the space around her words was where her actual assessment lived. She walked the East Enclosure row with me for 45 minutes. She examined the fence at Enclosure 7, the panels, the gate, the exterior marks I had been logging for 3 weeks. She walked the service road where I had seen the animal. She stood outside the guard booth and looked at the ground around the door and the window without comment. Inside the booth, she read Garrett's yellow legal pad in full. She read it without expression. She read my incident logs with the same absence of expression. Then she looked at the Enclosure 7 placard on my desk. I had removed it from the gate the previous week, some instinct I couldn't name, and she read it. Grizzly bear habitat, the laminated notice about structural assessment pending. She said, "How long have you been on this rotation?" I said 31 nights. She said, "The previous guard was here 6 weeks." I said yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There was a guard before him. He lasted 9 days." I waited. She said, "And before that, the park employed a night facilities manager for the last 2 years of operation. He submitted 17 incident reports about Enclosure 7 in those 2 years. FWP reviewed 3 of them. The other 14 were filed incorrectly and never processed." She set the yellow legal pad down. "The redistribution in 2019 processed 2 grizzly bears from this enclosure," she said. "The park's records showed 3 at the time of final inspection. The inspection team counted 2. The discrepancy was attributed to a record-keeping error during the preceding years of reduced staffing." She looked at me. "There was never a 4th bear," she said. "The R7 designation in the 2017 records was a data entry error. The park introduced a juvenile male in 2009 and mislabeled him in 2 separate systems. The 2 bears that were transferred are accounted for and in good health." I understood what she was telling me. I also understood what she was not telling me. "Then what is in Enclosure 7?" I said. It was not a question, exactly. More like a sentence that needed finishing. She picked up the placard. She looked at it for a moment. "This property has been on our radar for 11 years, she said. "There is an ongoing assessment. I cannot tell you more than that in my current capacity." She set the placard down and walked to the door. "Your contract will be terminated today," she said. "Full pay through end of month. Standard close-out package. The county will attribute it to a reduction in security requirements pending sale." She opened the door. "The marks on the outside of the fence," I said. "Garrett noted it was testing the perimeter, making sure nothing was getting in." She stopped. "I've been thinking about that," I said. "That's not prey behavior. That's not territorial behavior either. Not exactly. Something that's securing a perimeter from the outside is protecting something inside." Superintendent Marsh stood in the doorway for a long moment. When she turned back, her expression had changed in a way that I could not interpret. Not confirmation, not denial, something that lived between them. She said, "The animals that were transferred out in 2019 were 2 grizzly bears." She said, "The inspection team counted 2. She said, Prior to the redistribution, the enclosure held a female and her cub, born on the property in 2016. The cub was 3 years old at transfer. She left. I sat in the guard booth and looked at Enclosure 7 through the window in the early morning light. The fence, the artificial rock formation, the cave entrances. A female and her cub, transferred out, 3 years old, born on the property. I thought about what shares a habitat with animals that are being removed. I thought about what a mother does when something is coming for her young. I thought about where something goes when it has learned, over years of proximity, that enclosures have gaps that the builders never considered. I thought about the marks on the outside of the fence, testing the perimeter, making sure nothing was getting in, making sure the removal teams had not left anything behind. I check every lock twice before I sleep. My wife has stopped asking why. 3 years since Rimrock. I work warehouse contracts now, strictly commercial property, strictly urban. I told my supervisor I'm done with rural assignments. He didn't push it. I still drive the long way around parking structures with ground-level vents. I still avoid chain-link fencing at night. These are not rational precautions for the life I currently live. I follow them anyway. The body keeps its own ledger. Superintendent Marsh's office sent me a formal closeout letter 2 weeks after my contract ended. Standard language, then a handwritten line at the bottom, added after the printed text, in different ink. The property sold in January. Residential development. Groundbreaking scheduled for spring. I read that line 4 times. A residential development. Houses. Families. Children. I don't know if they found what was in Enclosure 7 before the groundbreaking. I don't know if they looked. I don't know if whatever had been securing that perimeter for years, whatever had been patient enough to outlast a zoo's entire operational life, intelligent enough to test fence panels systematically, careful enough to move through chain link without leaving evidence. I don't know if it relocated when the development began. I don't know where it went. 455. What I know is this. Somewhere in the Rimrock country south of Billings, Montana, something that the records never fully accounted for learned over 11 years of observation exactly how humans secure a space. It learned the gaps. It learned the patterns. It learned that padlocks can be bypassed and that door handles have mechanisms and that the light from a guard booth window can reach 6 feet into the dark but not further. It was not the thing in the dark that terrified me most in the end. It was the implication that it had been learning, and that somewhere, in a neighborhood that did not exist when I worked that property, in a development built on ground that remembers what lived there, it may still be applying what it learned. Every lock, twice. So far, whatever was in Enclosure 7 has stayed on its side of every fence I've put between us. So far.